Chapter 13. Sam walked over and stared down at the tousled-up members of the gang. 2 of them were still conscious, but the other 4 were completely knocked out. "What'd you do with them?" Sam demanded of the 2 conscious men. One of them was the leader, whom Pat knew as Harry. He spit blood and profanity out to answer Sam's question. "Who the hell are you talking about?" "You know who I'm talking about." Sam's voice cracked dangerously. "The Higgins gal and that young feller named Ben Andrews that rode up here to help her." "I don't know nothing about no Ben Andrews." "And what about the gal?" "Ain't seen her since she was dragged out of the cabin by that crazy galoot that was all shot to pieces. Hunt him up and ask him what he did with her."
"He means Pat, I reckon," Ezra put in.
"Yeah, and I reckon he's lying, too. Pat said the gal came back, and we know Andrews rode this way."
Harry grunted malevolently from his prone position on the ground.
"I swear we don't know nothing. None of us have got 10 feet from the cabin since that tall feller and the girl walked out on us. Heard some shooting down the creek a ways. What was that about?" "Well, that's just the tall guy getting himself shot up some more," Sam told him cryptically. "What happened up here after?" "Well, we made a break for the outside soon as we heard the shooting and figured the door wasn't covered no more, but there was a rider helling back from down yonder slinging hot lead from a rifle. So we got back inside, not knowing how many there was and what was happening. Hell," Harry ended quizzically, "this here's Lonesome Creek is gonna have to change its name after tonight. More shooting here than in Tombstone, Arizona on pay night. What do you 2 Rainies stack up in the deal for?" "I believe I'm asking the questions," Sam told him harshly. He stepped back and warned Ezra over his shoulder. "I'm going to look around and see that he's telling the truth. We know they didn't go back down the creek. Don't look like they could have got out of here unless they sprouted wings and flew."
He walked away towards the blank wall of the canyon not more than 100 feet up from the cabin. Ezra lounged forward and nudged each of the 6 men with the toe of his boot. Only Harry and 1 other man responded that they were conscious. Ezra figured the other 4 were dead or close to it and wouldn't be making any trouble for some time. He got each of the conscious men under one arm and dragged them up over the threshold into the cabin, where Sam could light a lamp on the table. The interior of the room was still heavy with wood smoke, but it began to clear away a little. Ezra dropped his 2 captives in the middle of the floor and made a survey of the cabin to satisfy his own curiosity. The only other occupant was a stiff corpse of an old man in one corner who Ezra surmised was Mose Higgins. There wasn't a single sign to indicate that Andrews or the girl were inside. Sam kept stalking in, as Ezra was completing his circuit of the interior, and Sam's dark features wore an odd look of utter disbelief. "There's no sign of 'em. No horses, no nothing. But we know they didn't go back down the trail." "Well, to hell with wondering about them right now. Seems to me like the first thing to do is get Pat up here and see how bad he's hurt. Then we can go to working on these 2 fellers and sweat some truth out of 'em."
Sam offered, "I'll stay here while you go down for Pat."
And Ezra went outside into the night. He mounted his horse and led Sam's along to pack Pat back on and proceeded at a brisk trot down the trail to the point where Pat was encountering the outlaw guard. He found Pat still laying on the rocks where Sam had laid him, but his Powder Valley partner was conscious now. He weakly lifted himself onto one elbow as Ezra approached and then sank back with a low sigh of relief when he recognized the one-eyed man's gigantic figure.
"Figured you'd be back," he murmured.
"I heard the shooting and all. Is the Higgins gal all right?"
Just you rest back and you take her easy.
Ezra soothed the wounded man. We cleaned up them varmints out of the cabin, and we're setting up housekeeping over there. Thought you'd do the cooking for us. It's no wonder you'd think of that on the first thought, Pat responded with a flash of his normal humor. If those flapjacks of Sam's I ate at the ranch Sunday morning is a fair samplings of the victuals you and him have been insulting your stomach with. Well, Sam's flapjacks do kind of come out of the pan sort of flat and discouraged like, Ezra agreed. If I lift you up and carry you to the saddle horse, you reckon you can make her to ride back up the crick? I can try, but I ain't guaranteeing any results. You better ride behind and pick me up every time I fall off. Take it slow and easy lifting me, Pat cautioned between set teeth. I've bled so much now that my heart ain't got much blood to work on. Ezra laughed and said, Oh, you always did have too much hot blood for a range-bred critter. But his big hands were as gentle as a woman as he carried Pat easily into his arms and carried him lightly back to his horses and waiting on the trail. That ain't my roan, Pat protested weakly when Ezra placed him in the saddle. He wavered there, supporting himself on Ezra's shoulder while he tried to find the stirrups that were much too short for his long legs. No, I brought Sam's horse down for you to ride back. Think you can balance yourself while I let out the stirrups? Pat nodded, getting both hands on the saddle horn to keep himself erect while Ezra swiftly and efficiently let out the stirrup straps. I reckon, Pat said, that roan of mine. He let the sentence trail off into a question mark. Yep, Ezra told him cheerfully. You won't be bothered riding that old hunk of crowbait no more. We'll fix you up with a good horse when we get you back to the Bar ES. We got a couple wore out bobtails that are just well suiting for a crippled old man like you. He stepped back and eyed Pat critically. Them stirrups, are they all right now? I reckon so. Got no feeling in my feet, so I can't hardly tell. You lead the way and I'll do my best to follow. Ezra was on the point of swinging into the saddle when he stopped and cocked his head down the canyon. He listened a moment and asked, Are you hearing what I think I hear? How the hell do I know what you're thinking you hear? There's pounding in my ears, that if that's what you mean. There's a horse coming. Doggone it if we ain't got more company. That'll be Adams, I reckon, or Scarface. He led his horse back into the concealment of the clump of juniper by the side of the trail, and Pat touched his mount with the spurs to make him follow. You stay right here with the two horses, Ezra ordered him harshly. I'll take this feller without any shooting if I'm lucky. He slipped away through the stand of junipers to the point of high rocks overlooking the trail just below the bend where Pat's roan and the dead outlaw guard lay and squatted there on the edge of the rocks 10 feet above the trail. The hoofbeats of the approaching horse were loud now in the silence, and the rider was coming at a trot, evidently familiar with the trail and totally without fear of incumbent. Ezra waited placidly and crouching there atop the rocks like a huge gorilla until the horse and rider came into view. If the rider glanced up and saw him, he would have thought Ezra was part of the rock formation, for he continued up the trail without hesitation until he was directly posed beneath the man from Powder Valley. Then, he must have thought he was caught in a landslide as Ezra's body struck him with crushing force. The terrific impact smashed him from the saddle, and his frightened horse leapt forward, and then docilely slowed and halted as the reins dropped to the ground and he stepped on one of them. Ezra hit the ground on top of the bulky figure of the rider. He felt the man go limp under him as the breath was crushed from his body by Ezra's weight. Ezra got up, lifted the man with one hand encircling his throat. His prisoner was Deputy Sheriff Clarence Adams, limp as a doll rag in Ezra's hands. He plunked the young deputy's gun from his holster and snuck it under his belt and walked forward to throw Adams' body across his own saddle like a sack of potatoes. Using the deputy's coiled rope, he passed a rope under the horse's belly and bound his hands and feet together in that manner, and then caught up the horse's reins and led him to the juniper thicket where Pat was waiting for him. "I got me another one," Ezra said. "That adds up to 7 now." He swung into the saddle and started up the trail leading the deputy's horse. Pat sat in the saddle with his reins loosely knotted on his horse's neck and let the animal follow while he set himself to the task of remaining conscious and in the saddle until they reached the cabin. Ezra helloed cheerfully when they reached their destination. The cabin door opened immediately and Sam came trotting out. "Did you get him all right?" "Which one?" Ezra grunted, stepping down and ground-tied both horses. Sam didn't hear the remark. He stepped past Sam with an exclamation of horror at the sight of the apparent lifeless man laying belly down across the saddle of the leading horse. Is Pat, is he bad off?" he asked shakily. "No, not as bad as this feller," Ezra told him cheerfully. "You better give him a hand while I untie this yahoo and see if I can wake him up." Not until then did Sam see the third horse and realize that the limp figure across the saddle wasn't even Pat. He stepped on up to Pat without asking Ezra any questions and asked anxiously, "Are you all right, feller?" "Pretty good, considering the shape that I'm in," Pat assured him hollowly. "Look out, I'm coming down." He let go of the saddle horn and swayed sideways. Sam caught him under the armpits as he came down. He held him upright, and Pat leaned against him and then got an arm over the smaller man's shoulders. Ezra had his prisoner untied and was enthusiastically slapping the unconscious man back into consciousness with his heavy, open-handed blows upon the cheek. As Pat limped towards the door, supported by Sam, he stared in surprise at the 4 unconscious members of the gang that were stretched out on the floor. "Looks like you and Ezra have been doing some wholesale slaughter around here." "Well, some of them are dead and some aren't quite," Sam told him cheerfully. "There's 2 more inside the cabin that are just pining to meet up with you." He helped Pat over the threshold and guided him into a chair into which Pat collapsed. His lips twisted into a grin when he saw Harry's bloodshot eyes glaring at him. "Didn't know we were going to meet again so soon," Pat told the gang leader. "And you not quite as good shape as you were last time I saw you." Harry cursed him profanely and at great length without repeating himself. He ended by growling, "What the blankety-blank is this all about? What kind of game are you playing with this feller and that one-eyed skunk? Jim Lacy ain't going to be liking this at all." Pat wagged his head from side to side. "That's a matter that I'd like to take up with Lacy himself." "You may be surprised with the chance before you think. Wouldn't surprise me none if he come out here tonight. I got word he was around close like." "Well, maybe this is him coming now," Sam hazarded as Ezra's bulky body filled the doorway momentarily. He was dragging Clarence Adams behind him, and his disfigured face was contorted with anger. He dropped Adams on the floor and heeled the door shut, announcing loudly, "He bit me on the hand while I was slapping him. Like a loco coyote, by God." He held one ham-like hand out to show blood dripping from it. "You reckon that I'll get lockjaw or something?" Adams stirred, sat up groggily, looked about of the interior of the cabin with an expression of cowed consternation on his suddenly handsome face. Pat blinked at him, then he looked again. He frowned and said, "Hell, you made a pretty bad mistake, Ezra. This here's the deputy sheriff that was taking me to jail when the gang broke up his party. You see, they thought I was working with them and that I had killed old Mose Higgins."
"That's right," Adams broke in angrily. "I'm riding here on official business."
He broke off with an exclamation of astonishment and chagrin when he looked up and saw Ezra's face for the first time in the lit cabin, with the big man's red-rimmed single eye glaring down upon him. He paused, gulped hard, and then choked out,
"Why, hell, you're one of the men that was in the saloon at Santa Alicia. There couldn't be two faces as ugly as yours in the state of New Mexico at one time."
Ezra nodded grimly. "Well, thank you for the compliment. You're plumb right. I am one of the innocent strangers you and your gun pal jumped tonight for no reason at all."
"And,"
drawled Sam, lunging forward so that the young deputy could see him clearly, "I'm the other feller that might near swallowed a chunk of lead from old Scarface.
What do you got to say about that?" "Why, I don't see how you got here. The posse's been scouring the whole countryside for you. You was afoot and..." "We were afoot until we moseyed back into town and saddled our own horses," Sam amended grimly. "What we want to know is why the law welcomes strangers into Santa Alicia by shooting before it start asking questions." "Well, you look like dangerous characters to me," gulped the young deputy. "The way you acted there in the dance hall. And the fact that we made the mistake of asking the bartender where we could find Mose Higgins," Sam finished grimly. "Well,
Clarence seemed to have a difficulty with his vocal cords. He darted a harassed glance at the tousled-up figures of Harry and his companion, and then looked back at Pat Stevens for a long, troubled moment. It was evident that the young man was desperately trying to add things up to correct an answer, that he was trying to figure out just where each man stood and what sort of mess he had gotten into. In the meantime, after Sam had mentioned the fact that he and Ezra had come to Santa Alicia asking for Mose Higgins, Harry began doing some fast thinking. Before Clarence could speak again, Harry growled at Sam. "Looking for Higgins, was ye? Maybe there's been a lot of mistakes made up this way tonight. What do you fellers want with Mose?" "That's what I want to know, too," Clarence put in sullenly. While this colloquy was going on, Pat Stevens' face took on more and more a look of complete bewilderment. He said sharply, "All three of us are old friends of Mose. We dropped in to visit him, and we don't know why any of this hullabaloo's all about anyway."
"And being so friendly with him, the first thing you did was kill him?" asked Clarence sarcastically, gesturing towards the corpse of Higgins huddled in the corner.
"That's all wrong," Pat declared. "It was like I told you and the girl at the ranch. There was some shooting before I got there, and then she plugged me, thinking that I'd killed her daddy, and that brings something else to mind." He went on, turning his attention to Sam. "Where's Helen now? Ezra said that she was all right." "Well, I didn't say nothing quite like that," Ezra disclaimed quietly. "I said we'd cleaned up the gang here at the cabin."
"Where the hell is she then?" Pat demanded. "Why are you making such a mystery about her?" "That's what I want to know as well. That's why I rode out tonight to rescue her from these outlaws that carried her off tonight." "I think maybe this feller can tell you about her." Sam pointed to Harry. "All Ezra and me know is that we couldn't find hide nor hair of her when we rode up here. We thought she was inside the cabin here till we smoked the gang out and found it empty. Then they claim they ain't seen her neither. But I think they're lying. It's time you all come clean," he growled, advanced at Harry malevolently. "What'd you do with that girl and the young feller?" "I swear we didn't see 'em. I told you the truth the first time."
Where is they then?
How would I know? Ask him. He pointed at Pat. He carried her out of here under his arm because he wanted her for himself. He's probably cached her away somewhere out of sight so he can go back to her and... Sam deliberately drew back his foot and kicked out 3 of the outlaw's front teeth before he could revile Pat further. There you are, he shrugged, turning back to the others. Nobody's seen the gal. Not since she left Pat and came riding back with his rifle. Well, then the trail must lead on up the canyon, Pat offered. No, Sam was positive. I looked. Nothing but blank rock wall in that direction. Maybe there's some path up over the side? There ain't, Clarence grumbled. Only way to reach this cabin is up Lonesome Creek. That's why Lacy chose it for his hideout. Kinda seems to me you know a lot about Lacy for a deputy sheriff. I meant, I suppose that's why he chose this cabin. What do you know about Lacy? Pat flung at him. The young man paled a trifle. He darted a worried glance over at Harry and wet his lips. Nothing much, he faltered. No more than common gossip. Everybody in New Mexico's heard about him and his gang. We're not from this cussed state, said Sam shortly. Tell us what everyone else knows. Well, his headquarters is on the other side of the border with his gang. Nobody knows just where. His gang was supposed to be broken up and scattered 20 years ago after a gun battle somewhere around here with a posse that trapped his gang after they robbed a stage and got away with a Wells Fargo shipment of gold. Most people thought Lacy was dead, but in the last few years he seemed to have gotten together another gang and started out again. Only he operated a wee bit different now. Different how? Pat snapped. Well, all I know is just what people say. He's more cautious now and plans each new coup with very carefully and doesn't ride across the border until he's all set to make a big cleanup, which he does maybe once a year. They say he's got members of his old gang scattered around the country where they've been living for years and pretending to be honest ranchers. They help him to work out a plan and for holding up an entire community and cutting the telegram wires and terrorizing the town with systematic house-to-house looting, robbing the bank and stores, hauling everything of value across the border where he can sell it at his leisure. Pat snorted his disbelief at this. This sounds like a storybook. It wouldn't be possible for a gang to get away with that. Well, Lacy's done her 3 times in New Mexico in the last 3-4 years, Clarence assured him earnestly. It's all a matter of organization, of laying the proper groundwork and getting his men in key positions before the shooting starts. They say he takes months planning each robbery, that he doesn't show his face across the border until everything is practically in readiness. Well, how about it? Sam demanded of Harry. Is that stuff right? How would I know? I never even heard of Lacy. Wait a minute, Pat interrupted Sam. He asked Clarence. What did Mose Higgins have to do with Lacy? Well, I don't know for sure. Nobody does. Some thinks he's a member of the original Lacy gang. Others think he's a little bit cracked and imagining things. But for the last few months, he's been going around dropping hints that San Alicia was in a dangerous visit from Lacy. He wouldn't tell anyone how he knew. He refused to talk about it, but he tried to make us get up a troop of United States cavalry in here. All sorts of crazy stuff like that. Well, naturally, Sheriff Petrillo and I figured we could take care of things ourselves. But he kinda kept hinting about getting help in, about some old friends of his if we wouldn't call in troops. Well, that's all there is to it. The young deputy spread out his hands helplessly. Naturally, when some hard-looking strangers ride into towns with their guns slung low asking for Mose Higgins,
It's up to the law to be suspicious of them." He glanced round at Sam and Ezra to make his meaning clear. "He's right," Pat agreed, speaking to Sam and Ezra. "Maybe we better give back his gun and apologize for jumping him tonight." Ezra started to protest, but Sam silenced his one-eyed partner with an eloquent look. "Sure," he drawled. "Pat's right, Ezra. Give the deputy back his gun and we'll figure out a right nice apology after we have time to think it over." Clarence thanked them gruffly and got to his feet with a look of determination on his heavy features. "Well, I gotta be looking for Helen Higgins," he announced. "We're practically engaged to be married, and I'm mighty worried about her." "Well, you go on and do it," Sam urged. "We'll stay here and get Pat patched up." But as soon as the door closed behind the young man, he snapped at Ezra. "You stay here with Pat and these other yahoos. I'm going to engine after that feller and see what's what. You can tell Pat what we overheard under them cottonwoods tonight, Ezra, and I'll be back soon as I find out something." He eased out of the door silently, and his wiry body immediately blended in with the night shadows, so that it was impossible to distinguish his movements. Not more than 50 feet away, Clarence Adam was mounting his horse and preparing to ride away, completely unaware that he was being followed by the shrewdest stalker in the Southwest. End of chapter 13.